Welcome back to Liturgy of Slaves. This is a place where we pull back the curtain on history's most shadowed corners, the ones that don't make it into the polite history books. I'm your host, and today, we're stepping into the dark wake of a family whose practices didn't just defy the social rules of their time. They dared to challenge the very blueprint of life and death itself. This is the story of the Halberts, a family who simply refused to bury their dead. Before we step into the darkness together, I have to give you a fair warning. What you're about to hear isn't for everyone. The echo of the Halbert name has a way of getting under your skin and staying there. So, if you're ready, dim the lights until they're just a flicker. Make sure your doors are locked, and steel yourself. This might be the most unsettling tale we've ever told. Our story begins in the mist-locked highlands of Scotland in the late 1700s. This is where the Halbert name first etches itself into the historical record. The head of the house was Magnus Halbert. From what we can gather, he was a strange, isolated man, stern, silent, and carrying beliefs about the threshold between life and death that were, to say the least, unusual. The family settled near a tiny village called Blackmore, a place tucked between jagged mountains and old-growth forests, so thick they seemed to swallow the light. It was the kind of landscape where superstition didn't just exist. It thrived, tangled up in the roots of the ancient pines. Magnus had fled Edinburgh with his wife Eleanor and their 3 children, William, Charlotte, and little Thomas, after a series of bizarre incidents made the city feel too small for them. No one knows exactly what happened back in Edinburgh, but the rumors were thick with whispers about Magnus crossing a line in his scientific experiments, dabbling in things no man should. When they arrived in Blackmore, Magnus bought a massive, lonely estate on the edge of everything. The manor itself was a grim sight, dark stone that seemed to drink the daylight, with windows like narrow, watching eyes. It sat on a hill, looming over the village below. The locals called it Ravencrest Manor, though the Halberts just called it home. It didn't take long for the villagers to realize these weren't their kind of people. The Halberts almost never came down from that hill. They'd appear only for supplies, never asking for help, never hiring local hands, even though the estate was huge. But the thing that really stuck in the town's throat, they never went to church. In those days, that was more than odd. It was an insult to God and community, but those small strangenesses were nothing compared to what was hiding inside those stone walls. In the winter of 1798, grief finally found the Halbert house. Eleanor was taken by a mysterious fever that swept through her like a fire. The local doctor, a man named Sullivan, was summoned up the hill to Ravencrest. Magnus met him at the door and led him silently to the bedroom, where Eleanor lay pale and utterly still. "I'm afraid we're too late, doctor," Magnus said, his voice flat, stripped of any emotion a husband should feel. Sullivan confirmed what Magnus already knew: she was gone. He started to offer the usual condolences, the talk of funeral rites and burial plots, as was the custom. But Magnus cut him off. "That won't be necessary." His voice was sharp, final. Confused, the doctor pressed him, explaining the importance of a proper burial. Magnus looked him dead in the eye. "The Halberts do not bury their dead, doctor. Eleanor will stay with her family. That is where she belongs." Shaken and unsure what to do, Sullivan left the manor that night with a chill that had nothing to do with the winter wind. The next day, he came back with the local minister, Reverend Clark. They tried to reason with Magnus to talk some Christian sense into him. But Magnus refused them entry. As the door creaked open just a sliver, both men saw something through the gap that would haunt their dreams for the rest of their lives. There, At the dining table sat Eleanor. She was dressed in a fine gown, propped up in a chair, as if she were simply waiting for dinner to be served. The family was gathered around her, carrying on as if nothing at all had changed. Reverend Clark was horrified. He demanded that Magnus show his wife some respect. Magnus's response froze the blood in their veins. Death is just a transition, Reverend. The body holds the soul long after the heart gives out. To bury her would be to cut that thread forever. I will not throw her to the cold earth. A word of this grotesque scene spread through Blackmoor like a plague. The villagers, already suspicious of the strange family on the hill, now looked at them with pure dread. Some shouted for the law to step in. Others were too terrified to even speak the Halbert name. Sheriff Douglas Mercer, the county's man for law and order, eventually rode up to Ravencrest to get to the bottom of it. Magnus met him not with defiance, but with papers. Old, yellowed documents covered in strange symbols and a language that felt ancient. "This is our family covenant," Magnus explained. "It goes back centuries. The Halberts have always kept their dead with them. It is our tradition, our birthright." Mercer was deeply unsettled, but he had to admit there was no law on the books that said a man couldn't keep a dead relative in his own house, as long as it wasn't a public health risk. He left with a warning that he'd be watching, but with no power to act. Months passed, and Eleanor remained in that house. The few visitors who were ever allowed inside reported seeing her everywhere. Not tucked away in a coffin, but present. Her position would change, as if she were still part of the family rhythm. Sometimes she sat by the fire, needlework in her stiff, lifeless hands. Other times, she was positioned at the piano, her frozen fingers resting on the keys, as if she might play at any moment. But the most disturbing detail was Magnus himself. He was seen speaking to her, carrying on one-sided conversations, as if he truly believed some part of her was still listening, still there. The children handled it in their own ways. William, the eldest at 16, seemed to have swallowed his father's beliefs whole. He treated his mother's corpse with the same reverence he'd shown her when she was warm and breathing. Charlotte, just 13, was clearly distressed, but she was too loyal, or too afraid, to push back. Little Thomas, only 8, would ask visitors when his mother was going to wake up. He didn't seem to understand that she wasn't just sleeping. For 2 years, this macabre arrangement held. Eleanor's body stayed in the house, preserved by some method Magnus had discovered, a secret he kept locked away. But in the autumn of 1800, tragedy circled back. William, out hunting in the woods, had his rifle misfire. It was a fatal accident. His body was carried home by his shattered father and siblings. And just like his mother, William was not buried. Instead, his preserved form was added to the family tableau. Witnesses described seeing him in his favorite armchair in the library, a book forever open in his stiff, unyielding hands. By now, the villagers of Blackmoor had developed a strange, complex relationship with the Halberts. Most stayed far away, viewing their practices as an abomination. But a few became morbidly fascinated. Some even whispered that the Halberts had stumbled upon secret knowledge, that they knew something about the afterlife the rest of us don't. These rumors only grew when people started reporting strange lights, flickering from Ravencrest at odd hours, and sounds drifting down the hill. Sounds that some called unearthly chanting. Shepherds told tales of seeing figures moving across the grounds late at night. Figures that walked with a terrible stiffness, as if their joints didn't quite work right. And in the village, a small cult of personality began to form around Magnus. A handful of locals, drawn to the mystery, started visiting Ravencrest. They came back with stories that only deepened the legend. Tales of Magnus conducting strange rituals surrounded by his dead wife and son, of ancient texts full of forgotten wisdom, and of experiments that seemed to dance right on the edge of what separates the living from the dead. One of those visitors was a young woman named Emily Sutton. She had recently lost her husband to consumption and was desperate. Desperate enough to seek out Magnus, hoping to learn his methods of preservation. Emily kept a journal, and what she wrote gives us one of the most vivid descriptions of life inside Ravencrest. She wrote, "The manor is not a house of mourning. It is a place where death and life exist together in an unsettling kind of harmony. The deceased Halberts are placed throughout the home as if they still take part in the day. Eleanor at her needlework. William with his books. Magnus speaks to them. He sets places for them at the table. He treats them as if they are simply silent, not absent. The most disturbing part is the children's acceptance. Charlotte reads aloud to her mother's corpse. Young Thomas plays at his brother's feet. They have normalized what should be impossible." Emily described Magnus as charismatic, articulate, a man who spoke of death not as an end, but as a temporary inconvenience. He showed her his laboratory, a room in the east wing cluttered with strange equipment, bottles of chemicals, and journals full of his work. She wrote, "Magnus believes that the soul stays tethered to the body far longer than we think. He speaks of death as a door that swings both ways. He believes that under the right circumstances, that door might be pushed open again." Whether it was grief or genuine conviction, Emily became a regular at Ravencrest. She started assisting Magnus, becoming something like an apprentice. Her journal entries grew stranger, more erratic, full of cryptic phrases like "the threshold" and "the return." This strange life might have continued indefinitely, if not for the winter of 1803. It was a brutal season. Snow cut Blackmore off from the world for weeks. Food ran low. Sickness crept through the village. And then 3 children vanished during a blizzard. Search parties were organized. The children weren't found, but the search led to a discovery that would shatter everything. Behind Ravencrest, half hidden by snow, searchers found a new building, a stone structure with no windows and a heavy iron door. From inside came a foul stench and sounds. One searcher described them as neither human nor animal, but something in between. Sheriff Mercer, leading the search, demanded entry. Magnus refused, so they broke the door down. What they found inside defies easy words. The room was filled with metal tables. On each table lay bodies, or pieces of bodies, in various stages of what can only be called reconstruction. Limbs and parts from different people had been stitched together. And worst of all, some of these terrible composites were moving, twitching and jerking, as if something dark and wrong was animating them from within. In one corner, barely recognizable, were the remains of the missing children. Magnus was arrested on the spot, along with Emily Sutton, who was found helping him. Charlotte and Thomas were taken into protective custody. They were malnourished, hollow-eyed, and in shock. A full search of Ravencrest revealed the preserved bodies of Eleanor and William, and at least 7 other people, all positioned around the house like residents, not remains. In Magnus's lab, they found his journals. They detailed his obsession with reversing death itself. He believed it wasn't final. He believed that with the right science, and what he called the old knowledge, the dead could be brought back. The trial was short and closed to the public. The charges were murky, probably because what they'd done didn't fit any clean legal box. But both Magnus and Emily were found guilty and sentenced to death. The night before the execution, something impossible happened. The jail was found empty in the morning. The cells were still locked from the outside. The guards were at their posts. No one saw or heard a thing. Magnus and Emily had simply vanished. When authorities searched Ravencrest again, the preserved bodies of Ella and William were gone too. Everything else remained. But the Halberts, living and dead, had disappeared without a trace. 3 days later, a shepherd reported seeing 5 figures moving across the moors in the early mist. A tall man, a woman, 2 children, and what looked like an adolescent boy. All 5 moved with that same stiff, unnatural gait. It was the last time anyone in Blackmoor ever saw the Halberts. Ravencrest Manor was abandoned. No one would buy it, no one would live in it. Over time, the weather and the woods took it back, until only ruins remained. A monument to the family who had lived, and perhaps never truly died, there. But the story didn't end in Scotland. Over the decades that followed, reports started trickling in from other parts of Britain, and then Europe, a strange family who never seemed to age. A family never seen burying their dead. In 1837, a physician in a small French village wrote about a family named Halbert. He was called to their home for an elderly woman who'd had a stroke. She was clearly dead, but the family refused to accept it. They said she was just in a deep sleep. The doctor noticed that the family members, especially the patriarch, moved strangely, as if their joints had forgotten how to bend. When the authorities came to investigate, the family was gone. All they left behind was a strange chemical smell. Similar accounts popped up all over the 19th century. Germany, Austria, as far east as Romania. The details shifted, but the core was always the same: a family obsessed with preserving their dead. Strange experiments conducted in shadows, and that unnatural way of moving. By the early 1900s, the Halberts had become a legend among those who study the macabre. Some believed Magnus had found a twisted kind of immortality, a half-life held together by his dark chemistry. Others whispered that the Halberts were never quite human to begin with, that they were something older, something that just wore human skin for a while. One of the most credible later sightings came in 1923. A private detective named Richard Thornton was hired to investigate a reclusive family in the Carpathian Mountains. A wealthy businessman was worried about his daughter, who had gotten involved with the family's son. Thornton's report, found after his own death, describes a family of 5 who matched the Halbert description in disturbing detail. He noted an elderly woman they called the matriarch. But she never spoke, never ate, and was constantly being moved around the house like furniture. Thornton's investigation ended when he was caught trying to photograph them. He was beaten and warned to stay away. In his report, he wrote, "I cannot say with certainty that these are the Halberts of Blackmoor. But if they are not, they are their spiritual successors. They carry the same miasma of death postponed rather than conquered. Natural law defied, but not without consequence." After Thornton, the trail goes cold. If the Halberts kept moving through the 20th century, they got much better at hiding. But in 2006, during a renovation in Prague, workers found something hidden in a sealed wall cavity. A collection of journals and scientific notes, written in archaic English. They detailed experiments in preservation and animation that matched Magnus Halbert's methods almost exactly. And with the papers, there was a photograph. It showed 5 figures: a stern man, a woman with a vacant expression, 2 children, and a teenage boy. They were dressed in Victorian clothes, but the photo itself seemed to be from the 1930s or 40s. Experts noted disturbing details. The subject's skin looked waxy, their postures too rigid, and the woman's eyes appeared to be made of glass. The papers and photo were bought by a private collector before they could be properly studied. Their whereabouts are unknown today. In the decades since, rumors and unverified sightings have flickered up in obscure corners of the internet. Urban explorers claim to have met a strange family in abandoned buildings. Hikers in remote areas report encounters with people who move unnaturally and speak in an old way of English. Medical supply companies notice odd bulk orders of preservation chemicals sent to abandoned addresses. None of it can be proven, but still, what if Magnus Halbert really did find a way? What if he found a method to preserve not just the body, but something of the soul, something that lingers after the heart stops? What would that mean for his family? Would they wander forever, neither truly alive nor properly dead, adding to their number as the centuries crawl by? What would they look like now, after more than 200 years of that terrible half-life? How much of their humanity could possibly remain? These questions haunt anyone who looks too long at the Halbert case. Whatever the truth, the story of the family who never buried their dead stands as a chilling monument to the danger of defying the natural order. It's a reminder of how thin the line is between love and obsession, and what can happen when we refuse to let go. Before we close this chapter, I should say, while the Halbert story has some verifiable elements, so much of it comes from rumor, folklore, and second-hand accounts. The full truth of what happened at Ravencrest, and what became of the family after, may never be known. But the shadow they cast is long. In Blackmoor, which is much bigger now, locals still avoid the ruins of Ravencrest. Kids dare each other to spend the night there, but almost no one actually does. Those who try often come back with stories of whispering voices and the feeling of being watched by eyes that aren't there. The story has also bled into fiction, Victorian penny dreadfuls, modern horror films. The image of a family keeping their dead as if they were still living has become a powerful, terrible motif in Gothic storytelling. And maybe most unsettling of all are the real-world echoes. As recently as 2018, authorities in a small Eastern European town found an elderly couple who had preserved the bodies of their dead children and grandchildren, keeping them around the house as if they were still alive. When questioned, they mentioned the Halbert Method. They said they learned it from a stranger who passed through years ago. If you want to dig deeper into this story, there are academic works that try to untangle fact from fiction. Dr. Elizabeth Montgomery Seaver, The Thanatology of Magnus Halbert, is a thorough examination of the science behind his methods. Professor James Harker's Ravencrest, a study in historical horror, places the Halberts in the context of 19th century death rituals. Both are available in our shop, along with reproductions of some of the Halbert documents that survived. And now, as we close, I leave you with one last thought. What if the Halbert story isn't just a cautionary tale from the past? What if, somewhere in the world, a family of 5 is still moving through time, adding to their number, never burying their dead because, in some terrible way, their dead never truly died? If you'd like to support this channel and help us keep dragging these forgotten horrors into the light, please consider becoming a patron. Your support lets us dig deeper into the archives and find even more stories from history's shadows. Thank you for walking with me into one of the most macabre mysteries we've ever explored. Sleep well, and remember, not all family traditions are meant to be preserved. But wait. Before you go, there's one more detail I should share. While researching this episode, I came across a strange listing on an obscure online marketplace for antiques. It was a small leather-bound journal, allegedly belonging to Charlotte Halbert, dated 1847, almost 50 years after the family vanished from Blackmoor. The listing was taken down within hours. I tried to contact the seller, but got nowhere. But I did save one image of a single page. Handwriting experts say it looks consistent with early Victorian penmanship. The paper and ink have been tentatively dated to the mid-1800s. Here's what it said. Father says we must move again. The neighbors have begun to ask questions about Mother. Why she never joins them for tea. Why she is only ever seen through the windows. William caused trouble yesterday when he went into the village. His movements are getting worse, despite Father's best efforts. The new formula isn't working like the old one. Thomas is the worst of us now. It's been almost 20 years since his accident, and Father's preservation methods seem to fail a little more each year. The stitches across Thomas's neck are starting to show through the powder we use to hide them. His left arm doesn't move at all anymore. Father himself is changing. Sometimes I catch him staring at nothing, his eyes just as empty as Mother's. I think he's been taking the formula too. Even though he still breathes, still eats, still talks about his great work, I alone remain as I was. Though for how much longer, I don't know. Father has been watching me strangely lately. I found him standing over my bed at night, syringe in hand, murmuring about preventative measures. Tomorrow we leave for America. Father thinks we'll find more freedom there to continue his work. He talks about vast empty spaces where no one will watch us. I don't know if I want to go, but I don't know if I have a choice anymore. I haven't had a choice since that winter night in 1803 when Father came to my room and told me it was time for me to help preserve the family legacy. Sometimes I dream of Blackmore. I dream of a proper grave, of consecrated ground of rest. But those dreams are dangerous. Father always knows when I've had them. He says it means I'm slipping away, that soon I'll need his help to stay with the family. I'm afraid that day is coming. My hands stiffen in the mornings now. My reflection has that same waxy look William had before his transition. Father has been preparing a special room for me in our new home across the ocean. If anyone finds this after I'm gone, or after I've changed, know that the Halberts still walk the earth, neither living nor dead. And if you see a family with that terrible stillness, their movements mechanical, their eyes never quite focusing on what they see, run. Run and pray they haven't noticed you. We can't verify this document. It could be an elaborate hoax. But if it's real, it offers a chilling glimpse of what happened after Scotland. And it raises an even darker possibility. That Magnus didn't just preserve the dead. He started preserving the living, dosing them before death could claim them, trapping his family in that endless twilight between states. If Charlotte's journal is real, the Halberts reached America in the mid-1800s. That would explain why European sightings faded. In America's frontier, records were spotty. A strange family in a remote area could go unnoticed for years. But local folklore across the U.S. is full of stories that echo the Halberts' tales of the Stiff family, or the Walking Dead folks. One account from a Colorado mining town in 1870 tells of a family named Halbert who bought an abandoned mine and turned part of it into private research facilities. A hired worker claimed to have seen something in a sealed section of the mine. People who ain't people no more, standing still as statues, but twitching like they're trying to remember how to move. When townsfolk went to investigate, the Halberts were gone. In a hidden room, they found chemical equipment, coded journals, and a collection of glass eyes, some still bearing traces of human tissue. Similar stories echo through Louisiana bayous, West Virginia mountains, Pacific Northwest forests. None can be definitively linked to the Halberts, but the pattern is there. The most recent chapter might be the most disturbing of all. In 2010, a fire at a remote farmhouse in rural Maine led firefighters to a hidden cellar. At first, they thought it was a mannequin workshop, but the mannequins were human remains, preserved over decades. Some of the more recent dead showed signs of having been preserved while still alive, as if they'd continued to move and function for months or years after the process began. No residents were ever found. The property had been bought years earlier by a cash buyer using a fake identity. Neighbors said they rarely saw the occupants up close, but sometimes glimpsed what looked like a family of 5 through the windows. Investigators found books and journals on preservation techniques, experimental chemistry, and fringe theories about life after death. Among them was a partially burned family tree. Near the top, one name was legible: Halbert. DNA testing was inconclusive. The case remains open, classified as a multiple homicide with no named suspects. Did the Halberts' centuries-long journey end in that fire? Or did they slip away again, leaving behind only their oldest, most deteriorated members as they fled into the night? We may never know, but maybe that uncertainty is fitting for a family whose very existence blurred the line between life and death, between history and legend. What we can say is that the Halbert story, whether fact, folklore, or warning, touches something primal in us. It speaks to our fear of death, our desperate need to hold on, and the terrible price of defying what's natural. In a world where science pushes boundaries every day, where cryonics promises future revival, where transhumanists talk about uploading consciousness, maybe the Halberts are a warning we need. Some doors shouldn't be opened. Some lines shouldn't be crossed. And so we leave them to whatever fate finally caught them, or to their endless wandering. If they still endure, their story remains a dark footnote in the annals of the macabre. A reminder that some traditions are best left in the past. As for Magnus himself, the man who started it all, maybe he got exactly what he wanted. A family death couldn't touch. A family that would stay together through the centuries, unchanging, while the world turned to dust around them. Whether that's triumph or tragedy depends on how you see life, death, and the shadowlands between. Sleep well, dear viewers. And tonight, maybe check your locks a little more carefully. After all, the Halberts, or whatever they've become, might still be out there, moving stiffly through the dark, looking for new additions to their eternal family. This has been the Ghastly Journal. Until next time, remember, not all histories are meant to be unearthed, and some families keep secrets that should stay buried, even if they themselves never will. But wait, before you go, I really should tell you something. During the making of this episode, a few of our researchers got strange phone calls from an unlisted number. When they answered, there was silence. Then a mechanical, halting voice would say the same thing every time: "We are still here. We are still together. Family is forever." We couldn't trace the calls. We don't know how the caller got our people's private numbers. Probably just a prank, someone who heard what we were working on. Still, I've told the team to stay alert. We've added some extra security at the studio, just a precaution. And with that, I really will say good night. Thank you for joining us on this journey into one of history's most disturbing family legacies. If the Halberts taught us anything, it's that some traditions belong in the past, and that sometimes letting go is the greatest love we can offer. Until our next exploration of the shadows where history and horror meet, this is the Ghastly Journal, reminding you the past is never really dead, and sometimes, in the most literal way, it refuses to be buried. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting the channel. Your help lets us keep digging into history's darkest corners. And if you have suggestions, or know of other historical horrors we should explore, leave a comment below. Now I really do have to go. There's a car that's been parked outside the studio all evening. The occupants haven't moved at all. Probably nothing. But in this line of work, you learn to be careful. Good night. And remember, some family reunions are best avoided.